everyone, welcome to Board Journey 360 Masterclass Series. I'm Joanna Gonzalez, Global Senior Director of Marketing with Boyden, and I'm based in Toronto. Now this series is truly a collaborative process between IWF and Boyden. Today marks the third of our 4 events, with each masterclass exploring a specific component of the board journey to altogether provide the 360 perspective. Our program today is quite unique as we'll be hearing from 4 prominent and versatile board directors who will speak to their experiences on boards and what it means to be an effective board director. We will be recording today's session, so what we share today will also be available to you and IWF Toronto chapter members soon. Please note that throughout the event, you have the opportunity to submit questions in the question tool feature, which will be closely monitored. We will aim to have some time to respond to your questions near the end of the hour. Now I'm pleased to introduce my colleague and today's moderator, Nick Chambers, partner at Boyden. Nick is known to bring a fresh approach to executive recruitment, combining his expertise in leadership development, organization performance consulting, board governance, and client service. He is passionate about the social impact sector and the critical role of higher education, healthcare, and not-for-profit institutions in creating vibrant communities and societies. Based in Toronto, he is a champion of diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of its forms. Nick, welcome.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from St. John's, Newfoundland, my home away from home if my partner gets her way. She probably will. I'm thrilled to be moderating today's Board Journey 360 Masterclass, what we might call a dispatches from the front lines of board governance discussion of sorts. And before we dive into the conversation, please allow me to introduce today's phenomenal panel. Let's start with Brenda Brown, an IWF member, accomplished HR professional and corporate director. Brenda Brown has over 30 years experience in the hospitality and telecommunications industries. She currently sits as an independent director on public and not-for-profit boards, including Solvable Solutions, and OTEC, the Ontario Tourism Education Corporation. Brenda is a graduate of the Rotman School of Management Institute of Corporate Directors and holds the ICDD designation. Welcome, Brenda.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, wonderful. Martine Ehrman, also an IWF member, accomplished executive and corporate director. Martine has over 30 years experience in international banking, treasury, securities and trade, and 20 years of experience on both corporate and not-for-profit boards with executive advisory councils, along with executive advisory councils. Formerly Vice Chair TD Securities and SVP TD Bank Group, Martine currently sits as an independent director of the board of the TMX Group of Companies and chair of the board for Export Development Canada. In addition, she sits on the board of St. Michael's Hospital Foundation and the campaign committee of MAP Center for Urban Health Solutions, and is the immediate past chair of the YMCA of Greater Toronto and a co-founder of United Way's Women Gaining Ground, now Women United. Welcome, Martine. And Leslie Wu, an IWF fellow. Leslie Wu, CEO at Civic Action, is a respected leader with over 25 years of experience building sustainable communities. She is federally appointed to the board of Waterfront Toronto, serving as member of its Investment and Real Estate Committee. She also sits on the board of Women's College Hospital and serves as chair of its Quality Academic and Equity Committee. With the global organization Urban Land Institute, Leslie is a member of the Curtis Infrastructure Global Advisory Board and just completed a term on the America's Executive Committee. Leslie had previous experience as a board member of the YMCA GTA, where she chaired the Government Relations Task Force. Welcome, Leslie. So folks, I promised you that it was a phenomenal panel, and you can see why from the bios, but let's get into the conversation and get to know a little bit more about what these fantastic women have to offer on the on the topic of board governance. So one of the things I've been looking forward to most about this conversation is the opportunity to discuss board work as a professional or vocational path, a phase or facet of one's career that's perhaps both curated and opportunistic. So a question I'd like to ask each of you, have each of you take a turn answering, is where are you in your board career journey, and in what ways have you been deliberate about the mix of board appointments you take on? Who wants to take a stab at that one first?
I will.
Brenda, thank you.
So I started off with two not-for-profit boards, Junior Achievement of Canada and Screens Colon Cancer, two totally different not-for-profit boards completely. And I quickly recognized that a not-for-profit board that was focused solely on fundraising wasn't my preference. Everybody has their forte. That wasn't mine. In any event, I did my best and brought donors to the board. So then I gravitated more to the hospitality sector and the college and university sectors, where I have more experience based on my career. And to that end, OTEC, the Ontario Tourism and Education Corporation, is really focused on hospitality, and I feel that that's somewhere I definitely can contribute. Just as an offshoot, though, I was a year and 18 months ago appointed to the Solvable Board, which is a cybersecurity company, which I don't know a lot about, but I'm quickly learning. But I find that my HR background is certainly called into question quite a bit. So I feel that's how I can contribute to that particular board. So started off not in any one area, but have gravitated to where I feel I can best make a contribution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. There's definitely an evolution and a diversity to that portfolio. Thanks, Brenda. Leslie, do you want to go next?
Sure, and I think I love that this question is about board career, because I don't know that I've ever really thought about board as a career. So it's great to now look at it with that lens, because really my interest in being on boards has always been a combination of self-interest and giving back at the same time. Self-interest in so far as selecting organizations that were close to my deep interest in city building and impact. And so whether it was the YMCA, which was a big part of my kids growing up in community, or whether now with the Waterfront Toronto or the Urban Institute with the work I've been doing previous to this in transit and infrastructure, just trying to find the convergence. So not everything is purely about purpose and mission of the organization, but oftentimes it's because I was doing it not as a career, but on the side of my desk, so to speak, trying to make sure that every minute that I gave to it was a value exchange. Maybe that's the way to think about it. And I think the other thing that I think about now in hindsight, and then looking ahead, it is something that I'm even more deliberate now and thinking about it as more of a career, because I feel at this point I have now had enough board experience that I can kind of leverage it in a more explicit way around strategic issues, having sat on both sides of the board table.
That's terrific, Leslie, and I love that concept of a value exchange. Martine.
Yeah, and I'm a bit akin to what Leslie just said, but I was fortunate enough when I was working at TD that I had the responsibility for international banking. And with that came various countries where we had representation offices or branches. And with those responsibilities, we had a requirement in various jurisdictions to have an oversight board that comprised external members of the community to sit in on these boards. So I had some growing experience around that from a governance perspective. On a personal basis, certainly the idea to give back, and Leslie and I met, I think, at the Y, was also wanting to get involved with areas of the community. I was with Big Brothers, I was with Big Sisters as a volunteer, and then the organizations merged both nationally and on the operating side, so was involved with that. And then was recruited to the Y, which has been fabulous. I've served 11 years there. I do think that part of the journey relative to a career is something that, like anything else, you have to plan for it and you have to think about it. So I was fortunate to have had board experience as part of my career. And within TD, I was still working at TD, an opportunity to apply, because it is an application process right now at the federal level for Crown, came up, and I was supported by my CEO, both the bank and my dealer's CEO. So that was a thought process around, at some point you do retire, where do you want to give back and how do you want to give back? But I do fundamentally think that it is something that you need to strategize if you are looking to sit on any kind of boards. I know we want to talk about the diversity between different sectors and industries, and it has to be a mutual fit. And that conversation has to be very methodical, because you can end up on a board, and I have a couple bad experiences where you end up on a board for the wrong reasons, and it's just not good for the board, not good for yourself, and not good for the corporation. So that's my journey thus far.
Great. Thanks to the three of you. And hopefully one of the outcomes from this session is that our audience picks up a tip or two that allows them to learn from your experiences, both the positive and the ones that were less than optimal. And to that end, you've each had enough time on boards, reporting to boards, learning about governance to gain a sense of what being an effective board member looks like. And so I'd like to go there next. And in answering that question, also curious as to, from your perspective, whether board effectiveness looks different depending on the type of board you're on, or the type of sector that the organization happens to belong to. I'm wondering if, Brenda, you'd like to take a first stab at that one.
Sure. In terms of being an effective board member, it goes without saying, you've got to be well prepared. You just don't show up to the board meeting having not reviewed the board documents clearly and asked any questions in advance. But I think what I find to be most effective, you've got to be self-aware of your impact to the board. You've got to be knowledgeable about board etiquette. You have to ask the right questions. You have to be cognizant of other board members and how they contribute and how you have a discussion. I find you always have to be learning, and that could be by sitting on another committee or spending more time perhaps with the CEO or the C-suite, spending a day in the field. You've got to be balanced. You've got to have a good perspective. You've got to be a little bit of a skeptic as well. Obviously, you have to be a good communicator, socially savvy. Those are some of the things that I think make an effective board director.
Fantastic. Martine, what do you want to add to that?
Yes, Brenda's got my first 12 items done. So we are consistent on that. I mean, there's the effectiveness of a board member, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have an effective board. So I think you have to be conscious around that. I think Brenda just did a good job talking about, obviously attend, be present. I won't repeat any of the stuff she said, but you have to also be very high EQ around the other members on the board and management. I think board effectiveness in itself, not by individual board members, is a very, very important point, and something that most boards now are doing audits, not just the annual review process. And I think you have to be fairly culturally aware. Various boards in various countries operate differently. There's different cultures in various boards, and I think culture audits are also very important. What kind of board is it? If I do all the things to be a good board of director, but I have a chair who can't listen, or I have a two-tiered board, as I like to call it, where there's, some committee members think they're more important than board members and they're not as engaging. So you really need to be able to have a culture, or certainly for me, what's worked well, a culture of respect, of trust and candor. And that you have to fundamentally believe that your role as the governance or fiduciary oversight is one piece, but there's a whole other piece that comes with the dynamics of an effective board at large. So Definitely the table stakes for individual boards are growing, and Brenda's outlined them, but I think that you have to also be aware of the culture that you're walking in on and what culture works for you to be effective as an individual board member.
Fantastic, really helpful, and that piece around the culture around the table is particularly powerful. In my question, I was expressing some curiosity around whether that formula for board member effectiveness, translates well across, types of boards and sectors. And I would love to have someone weigh in on that one. I do note in particular, though, that point that depending on who you have around the table, that in of itself can require different competencies out of each of the members. Any comment on if I was to say a not-for-profit board requires different competencies than the board of a listed company versus a crown? Would anyone support that argument? Would you want to refute that argument?
Maybe just, I think there are distinctions in board members, not so their duty, but it's the relationship, what I'll call in camera, and then in public. If you're in a public board that is where in fact there's a public audience or a government agency, and your webcast live, you behave very differently than if you're in a small not-for-profit board where the members are the board members. And what I mean by that is, the ability to have certain discussions require, in some cases, especially in a very public board, pre-discussions with staff and having good judgment about what's discussed around the board table in the public forum and quorum versus what you take away in camera, because your accountability and the importance of transparency has different dimensions to it when you are a government agency versus a private sector board, or even large not-for-profit board. So I think understanding and being able to modulate between those things, and knowing that sometimes prying questions to staff can come across as you're trying to investigate, but it may come across in a public face as accusatory. And so understanding that your responsibilities may have a public face as well as all the other issues that you deal with, fiduciary or otherwise.
That's great. Thanks very much, Leslie. I think we could probably all agree that until you've spent some time around the board table, the experience of serving on the board can seem like somewhat of a black box. It's a mystery to those on the outside looking in. So on that note, I would love to get a little conversation going around some common misconceptions about serving on a board. Leslie, let's keep going with you. Anything that you're aware of, a common misconception?
I think I would say this is a misconception that because you're a board member, you're quote unquote in charge. And that in fact, as a board member and even as a chair, there's a whole collaborative effort that happens between management and the board, between the CEO and the chair. That's also a different dynamic. And I think most people feel, well, you're on the board, you can make all the decisions, and that's definitely not the way it works. I think the other thing I would say is that being on the board and you have like a small snippet of time by which you're ruminating about the content of which staff are spending 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on, there's no way you'll ever be able to know everything. And therefore, you're not there to be an expert in that sense, but you're there to give strategic advice and bring to bear your own expertise from your professional or your lived experience or whatever. And so I think there's always this misconception that, you're expected to know everything about everything. And our brains would all explode if that was the truth.
Absolutely, absolutely. Brenda, thoughts?
One thing I'd add to Leslie's comments, and sort of in the similar vein, is that I would say it's a popular misconception that board members know exactly what to do when they're elected to a board. And I think that heightens the importance of board orientation. And a good board orientation will certainly send that new director onto a better path of being able to best impact and add value to the board. So board orientations, you know, shouldn't be sneezed at. They really are something very, very important and can take on, you know, many different flavors.
That's fantastic, Brenda. And in fact, I was going to ask a question a little later on onboarding and orientation, but since you've gone there, why don't we continue down that path? What have you folks seen go well? I mean, the question of board onboarding, executive onboarding, is getting a lot of attention in governance, board effectiveness circles. What positive experiences have you had? What's the best onboarding experience that you've had? Martine, do you want to weigh in first?
Sure. I mean, I think there's the standard process, which is, you know, millions and millions of reading material, and then you do the interviews with management, with fellow board members, with chairs, with people that we seek to hire, board members like you, Nick, when you're doing your rounds. Most boards have board mentees. I would say, you know, the chairs and the committee chairs are also good. There's nothing better than actually in-person visits if you go to a geography of where an office might reside. There's also what's really good, and that reflects on culture, is you know, employee events where the board are invited, not just, you know, not to meet with clients, but at least they get a feel for the culture, they get a feel for. But there's also doing a lot of homework around what is the culture of the board. And I harp on this because you could do all the homework you want and think you know, but unless you sit in that board meeting and you see what triggers conversations and reactions while enhancing your fiduciary oversight, but when it comes down to strategy or when it comes down to stress points, like I think about most boards have gone through COVID, if they didn't pivot during COVID, and whether it's the Y, which did a lot of pivoting, or EDC did a lot of pivoting, or TMX, those are my experiences, or others, then you know, you don't understand how to be effective in that moment for the company, and you might end up at the bottom of the class, or you might end up having done some amazing work. You just don't know. So I think onboarding experience is extremely important. The standards are there, but I would also advocate to do your homework with some of the informal feedbacks by doing management, employee, former chairs, to get a handle on the culture.
Great. So some proactivity there. Yes, Leslie.
No, I was going to add, I think one of the most positive onboarding experiences is group orientation, as distinct from individual orientation. When there are new board members coming on at about the same time, you learn so much more, not only because the questions that other new board members are asking, you go, oh, I didn't think of that. That's a great question. That plus there's a bonding that happens when you're oriented together, which leads to Martine's point about the importance of the culture of the team. And so you have that, you're part of the newbie culture, and then you can kind of grow through with the organization. And as compared to, I've done some board orientations which were individual, so sort of these a bespoke one-on-one, which was good, but I think I got more out of the group orientations.
That's fantastic. And Brenda?
Just add to that, and it's one of the boards that I'm on, we have an ongoing type of orientation. And before each formal board meeting, there's a half-hour optional session where someone from the C-suite will present to the board some information or overview of a particular project that they're working on that, you know, might be discussed at the board or might not be discussed at the board, but something that gives us all a little bit of familiarity with what is what's happening in the company at that particular time. And so, you know, you have that opportunity to ask questions, and it's focused solely on that particular topic. which has been, quite helpful in terms of understanding what goes on in the business.
That's phenomenal. So one of the things I appreciate about this part of the conversation is it has me thinking that, rather than as a new board member, waiting and hoping that you'll have a positive onboard experience and you'll be sent those tactical items at the time that you need them, and oriented to the culture at a time and in a way that is useful and productive. There's a little bit of advocacy we can do on our own behalf, and we can take that idea of the group orientation, or we can take that idea of the ongoing orientation and make that an early contribution to the board that in turn benefits you as a new board member. That's fantastic. So we're effectively oriented and onboarded, and we're keen to contribute, and we're all clear that by this point, I hope anyway, that board governance is not a rubber stamping exercise of approving minutes and seconding motions and deferring to management. So, on the question of engagement, what tactics have you seen employed to encourage engagement, healthy debate, and strategic decision making? Martine, anything come to mind?
Sure. Especially on the strategic decision-making process. I think you have to be clear at what point you are in a dissent about a decision of oversight and what's the common goal. Because you can have people that will say, well, I completely dissent on going into this geography. Why are you going there? You haven't given me enough material. So you have to say, okay, well, what's the common goal here of this decision and discussion and debate? And then reinforce that providing an opinion that might not be popular is not to be taken personally. That opens up the opportunity to explore different angles. So how oftentimes have you said, oh, why are we going into this jurisdiction or this country with this kind of transaction that's supposed to be assigned to us on a growth basis, when you're going, I don't even want to go in that jurisdiction. And then if you're able to have this established limit of time when there is dissenting viewpoint, and then you come back to a clear common goal, you have a much more nourishing conversation. But that's not easy. And then with respect to strategic decision making, I think strategy is at the board, it's at the company level to execute and implement, but it's at the board to oversight. So as much as you can have strategic discussions, and I like Brenda's idea in the pre-board meeting, what we do at TMX and EDC for that matter is we make sure that a part of the strategy is presented to the board in the context of education, but also decision making. So ESG is a huge topic. So let's talk about ESG and let's figure out, do we have the right governing model? Do we have the right strategy? And I mean, I never imagined we'd be on a company board right now that would do, net zero emission by 2050, let alone 2030. Well, that wasn't on the board agenda a year ago in our 5-year plan. So being able to sort of have those kinds of conversation in a holistic manner while being respectful would be some of the tactics I offer.
That's phenomenal. Yes, Brenda.
I would just add to Martine's comments that having a good board chair makes all the difference. Someone who, can direct the conversation, cut it short when it needs to be cut short, go for a decision when you should be going for a decision. Managing that culture of the board, certainly has an influence on the discussion and how the discussion takes place.
Maybe to build on Brenda's point, I think, someone once said, good productive work can only happen at the speed of trust. And so to build on what Martine is saying, what Brenda is saying, it's not only what happens in the boardroom, it's what happens before and after outside the boardroom. And I think that the trust building that is necessary to flesh, what is it that needs to be, can be fleshed out ahead of time, which means everyone needs to read the content. They need to have an opportunity to ask questions before. And so staff, whether staff have to address it or as a group, a subgroup within the board to discuss it and understand exactly when it comes to the table at the board, it's a far more refined question, not general conversation that you would have in a, I don't know, at a cocktail party or something. Not that anybody does that at a board table, but it's far more deliberate. And I think what Martine described, which we refer to at Women's College as the opportunity and set aside the time for generative discussions, is what enables you to step away and be focusing on more strategic, less tactical issues. And then finally, I would say one of the other things I think are important in terms of engagement, debate, and even strategic decision making is the board itself asking who's not in the room. In other words, we are who we are. We know what we know, but we don't know everything. And is this something that we actually need to get some, not even from a management standpoint, but we want a third lens or ear or eye, or should the chair go talk to X, Y, and Z, or should a bunch of us go explore something? Because you know, in a day and age where challenges and questions are so complex, likely there's a perspective that's not at the table that could be part of the solutioning.
And are there structures that folks have seen to facilitate that, you know, making sure that we have other voices at the table who aren't there? You know, I've seen where we would almost have a committee or an advisory body of past board members who, you know, serve a specific purpose, or a youth or specific stakeholder. Other structures that have worked well?
So we have when you plan ahead, and this is on both boards, we have obviously the agenda of each of the committees, but we also have decided to ensure that we, the board, get exposure to third parties, not to validate or contradict what's being prepared or proposed, but you know, nothing healthier if you're a publicly traded company to get some investment banking that thinks you're a sell to come in and tell you, where's your growth strategy? What do you think? And you can get all these investor feedback information and you read them ahead of the board meetings from investors. But the reality is, again, who's not at the table that can be frank with the board and the company and say, but you need to then ensure that the CEO is comfortable. And that's really is important, but that you get, like on ESG, I don't want to hear just our own ESG team to come forward. So we did an external survey on where does ESG sit in other companies and other export credit agencies. How do we govern over it? What are the best trends that are happening? How do we want to be leaders, laggers? So getting a third party opinion on strategic board topics is extremely important.
I think, Nick, for us now at Civic Action here, we have the benefit of an Emerging Leaders Network is 3,000 strong of all this talent across the region. And we often periodically, first of all, we have the co-chairs sit on our board, like they deliberate with the board, they're part of the engagement, and periodically come in and on strategic issues, or if they come in to bring some insight or ask some question to the board. And it is oftentimes because the board is of a certain age, a certain education level, so it is as diverse even as our board is, it still is missing a lot of the lenses around, and we're focused on inclusive cities. So, you know, knowing all the dimensions is important. So that plus we also sometimes convene what we call a champs council, which are advisory to the board as well. And depending on the project or the program or where you are in your strategy development, they become really, really useful. It's sometimes actually either to challenge or to validate where the direction you're going.
Love that. I love that. And so all of this engagement and debate needs to lead somewhere. So our favorite topic of impact and evaluation, and would love to hear from two or more of you on the question of how is board impact evaluated. Brenda, thoughts on that?
Sure. A lot of discussion or interviews by the chair or the lead director with individuals director, you know, having a conversation with them in terms of how do they think they're contributing, how could they improve, how can the chair help them more in their ability to have an impact. You discussing what expertise they bring to the board. Obviously there's the common surveys online or paper and pencil, third-party interviews, full board retreat discussions have also been quite helpful. And in one of the boards that I'm on, after each meeting, we have a very short review of what went well and how could we improve. So it's just a quick feedback session after, the in-camera session to say, how can we even be better? How can we contribute more? Just basic, a self sort of review, self-awareness.
So that's really a combination of ongoing routine, but informal feedback, and then some more formal interventions along the way. Thanks, Brenda.
One thing that I would put forward though is you got to watch out for evaluation fatigue. It's a symptom of a poor process. So the feedback that you're getting becomes useless if it's not properly, if the whole evaluation isn't properly managed.
And Brenda, what might that look like? Are there certain signs to watch out for that signal evaluation fatigue?
Well, if the feedback is always the same, if there's nothing different and people are just, either saying yes to everything or ticking off yes, excellent, or, you got to look at what the feedback is and say, if it's always the same, it can't be always the same. There's so many different things you're discussing at a board, and there's different dynamics at each meeting. So I can't believe that everything is going to be evaluated the same from board to board.
Right.
So yeah,
perhaps too, if your response rate starts to decrease. I'm sorry, Brenda, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's all. I was just going to say, I think you have to adjust the process as the board matures.
Yeah, and I would add rotating year after year with a different process is a good thing to prevent that from happening. So one year you do an external assessment, improving the evaluations. So in one board, this year was the first time we did 360 evaluation, evaluated the chair, self-evaluation. You were mandated to not have a comment if it's not within our range, and welcomed that even if it's in the middle range, that we're all exceptional, or in the middle, not exceptional or poor, but in the middle, that you had to provide a comment anyways. I also think that, when you have new board members, obviously after every board meetings, the chair or the committee chairs sit down with them or have a conversation. I'm chair of EDC, have the habit of, I went and met every member in person before my first board meeting. Yes, from Newfoundland and -30 to California. But I also, at the end of the meeting, it's a great opportunity to sit down with the management team and the CEO and say, what do you think worked well from your perspective? And here's what I think worked well, and the committee chairs from our perspective, and what more importantly didn't work well. So that is in the context of having to have trust, but it does really open it up. And then I have, the chair and the committees have their own feedback with management as well as with the CEO. So I think that's an important process. And it's also an important process for you as board members to receive feedback, because that will help you assess culture and what's working well and not working well.
And I think most directors want feedback.
Indeed. Martine, you made reference there to that board and CEO relationship, and we've had a sprinkling of mention of CEOs throughout this conversation, but I want to tackle that a little more directly and invite folks to comment on what an optimal board CEO relationship looks like from your experience. Why don't we start with the sitting CEO in Leslie? And you can speak to it from whichever angle you'd like.
Yeah, and so I would say, and so having sat on boards and not chaired a board, having served as a member of management to a board, and now as a CEO, the relationship between the CEO and the chair is quite unique and different than the relationship of a director with the CEO. And what I mean by that is, finding the groove, the pace, because you're in more weekly, daily, constant contact with the CEO possibly than the other, even some of the board directors. So the ability to have a strong working relationship and to be at I talked about trust earlier, but a place of co-creation and collaboration, because while the chair is leading the board in terms of that responsibility and governance, as the CEO, you're sort of bridging between management and the CEO. So it's a really critical and unique relationship. I would say, especially now, I serve a not-for-profit board, and it's volunteer. Understanding the value exchange. So for the chair, who is now devoting way more of his or her time, taking on more responsibility as the chair of the board, obviously cannot take that for granted, but I think there's also an elevated expectation relative to the relationship. So it's therefore very important that there is an understanding that you're kind of trying to build off each other's strengths, and that you have different strengths, and that you're better together than one on top of the other. It's not an employer-employee relationship or a master-servant relationship, or whatever the equivalent is. It is a very different kind of collaborative.
Fantastic.
I would concur on that. It's a unique relationship. When I was chair of the YMCA, and had Maudie, obviously Leslie and others, you're different. Every chair is different than the previous chair, so you have to be able to build that trust. But you also have to make sure you don't get too close and too subjective, and that you have the objectivity. And you're there as a coach in moments of duress and crisis, because you want that trust to be built so that it can be raised at the board. But you also have to be there to help them vent and deal on what suggestions you might have in place. When you're a crown chair, absolutely very different, because you're the middle person between the minister, whom you serve at pleasure for, and the corporation oversight as a quasi-independent board. So, sometimes the minister might want the corporation to do certain things that the board would not want to do, and let alone the CEO. So you have to play that balancing act. But it is a very important relationship. And when it comes down to, CEO evaluation and what they're thinking and what their tenures are and what succession looks like, I kind of refrain a little bit. I empower the HR committee and I listen to everyone, and then because you don't want to be too close either, because then you oversight your responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Brenda?
I agree with both what Leslie and Maxine have said, and I think the CEO has to feel that the board and the chair is there to support him or her. And, as Maxine said, it's a gradual building of trust. We're not there to tell them how to do their job. It's that, common phrase, noses in, fingers out. So as both have said, it's a fine line that you walk.
Great. Thank you. I want to take us back to almost to where we started. With this notion of curating a board career, and again, whether that's a phase, a distinct phase of your career, or a facet of your career, and ask, what's been your approach to assessing board opportunities that might take you outside of your comfort zone? Martine, have you had that experience?
Yeah, I've had a really good one on that one and a really bad one, but I think you have to be honest with yourself. Why are you doing this? You have to think about, what is the objective? Why me? I know it's not why me, and why would I fit given their skills matrix? And sadly and truthfully, what's also in it for me? And at a different stage in your life, I'm in the giving stage. I've had a successful career. I want to give back. So there's a factor of, okay, I have some knowledge. Where would I fit for that? And what kind of environment would I enjoy to do that, both professionally and personally? But I think you have to think, what's the return on time and effort? And will I be able to give back and be successful at giving my skill set? So what's the board objective, and what's your objective with that?
That's great. Leslie, anything you wanted to add, or
Yeah,
or
just
this-
very,
or- or
yeah, I think very,
different
very quickly.
perspective?
I think, so two things I would say. So I think joining the Women's College Hospital Board, health care is not in my anything other than I've been to a hospital. And I think, but what drew me to it was the focus on women's health. And I have been a longstanding advocate for women leaders, women and gender issues. And so I felt this was going to be a place I could learn. And to be frank, for the first year on that board, it just glazed over me everything it was all so new. But by the second and third year and into my second term, and now I can't believe I chair the Quality Academic and Equity Committee, because I would never have imagined that I'd even know how to carry on the conversation, far less learn the acronyms. But I realize now that it actually played to my strengths insofar as, because I didn't know the details, I could remain strategic around the questions that were being presented and the issues that were before, because in the end, often, regardless of industry, the challenges businesses face are very, very similar, though the details may differ. So that's one. I think the other thing that has always been a little bit of a questioning and comfort zone is, as a racialized woman, the imposter syndrome, which is, would I, could I, should I, do I belong, could I do it? I'm not really, I didn't do training for this. And I think that has always been the reason I've always kind of overcome that, is to say, but if I did, I know that I will be a role model for so many others. And if I did, I'd be learning. And if it didn't turn out well, it didn't turn out well. It's not failure. It's just you tried it. And so I think for me, in terms of moving outside my comfort zone, that has been a I've overcome it, but I know in the beginning that was something for me. It was like, I never felt like I actually belonged there, because to Brenda's point about the fundraising, please don't come to me to ask for fundraising, because I wouldn't even know how to begin to do that. But I knew I was bringing other things to the table that were valuable. So I share that.
Really appreciate that, Leslie, and all of you. Really appreciate the honesty of your responses. I set this conversation up as field notes from the front lines, and I really do feel like you have been delivering on my promise. So thank you. Let's see if we have. We do have a few minutes. Let's see if we have questions from the audience. Joanna, anything?
Yes, I do have a few. Let's start here. What does success look like in the first 6 to 12 months as a board director?
Super. Who wants to weigh into that one?
I was going to somewhat facetiously say, remembering the names of all the board members.
That's a start. That's a
photo name. Yes.
And what will we do when we're back in person and we don't have these little labels? We'll have to find those tent cards that are packed away in a box somewhere.
Or the other one, leading on from that, is the acronyms that the company uses. Every company has their own set of acronyms, and one that you may have used in one company means something totally different in another one. And at one point on the OTEC board, they're infamous for using acronyms, and I said, we need to get a lexic. Let's just get a piece of paper, write them all out, so that we're not kind of looking around. So what was that one again? So it was a very simple solution to a problem that everybody had.
Absolutely, and that's part of your ramp up.
Yeah,
learning the language.
And I would add, as a new board member for the first 6 months, over and above what was mentioned, is part of your onboarding is you were hired, you were chosen in a fairly structured environment with skills matrix and stuff that Nick's company does for all of the people that select. So trust yourself, don't be hard on yourself. And you won't know everything, and you will never know everything, but you've been selected. So usually it's not a failed search. So you've got areas what you judgment and experience can pipe in on.
And ask for feedback.
Yes.
Mm.
And I would say after 6 months, you'll find yourself moving from the why questions to the how. Because I know when I started, well, why is it done that way? Why? And then it's like, okay, how? Because now I'm sort of in the move. I'm trying to be part of contributing to the way forward.
Great. These are some really useful frameworks. Thank you. Joanna, other questions?
Yes, we have a question here. Brenda talked about the need for a good board chair. We know that good board chairs are like unicorns, very hard to find. Why is that? Maybe how do you find a good board chair? Is there a way to do that as well?
That's a great question. I think it's a unique personality trait. It's like being the CEO of an organization. Someone has to want to be chair, and they have to realize that they're managing a group of people. And I would anticipate that, it is difficult to find that right person because, in addition to being the board member, they're the board chair, and they're managing everything that goes on at that particular meeting and the relationship with the CEO. So I think it is a very difficult search to find that right person.
I think getting feedback is important. Again, back to the evaluation process. So the chair is not exempt. You got to get chair feedback. You got to give the committee chairs feedback. You're going to get feedback from management. There's always areas for improvement, and chairs have different styles. So it's, at some point, different styles at different cycles of the economy or different cycles of where you are in your strategy. You have to make sure that there's a balance. But a chair should be able to self-assess as well as be very assessed by others and open to feedback and open to improvement. And it's not just the formal process, it's the informal process. It's when, Nick, you're doing a search and you're going, okay, really? Well, this person can't even listen, or this person has a history. And what do other people say about you? People that have either sat on your board or have seen you in other situations. The informals, I think, are equally, if not more important as well.
Couldn't agree more. And in fact, we've mentioned a few times the board matrix, and I was thinking as the two of you were speaking about the intersection between a board matrix and your succession plan, and what are you doing to plan ahead? In fact, what are you doing from the moment you go looking for a new board member around what future roles might this person play? Might they, do they have the potential to serve as the chair of audit? Might this be a future chair of governance? Might this be a future chair of the board? And so it's that succession planning overlay on top of the work of a board that I think gets us part of the way there, in addition to some of these key points around feedback and so forth. That's great. Joanna.
We do have another question. How important is it that the CEO and board chair get along?
I think it's 1,000% important.
If you have animosity between the CEO and the chair, it's doomed.
I agree. You also have to make sure that it is a balanced relationship where the CEO isn't just managing the chair for his or her own objectives, and it's a balanced relationship. You can get caught off guard. You think the company culture is X, you think everything's going well, all the KPIs are, compensation kicks in, everything's great. And you realize that person isn't who we think we are, or they are, if you dig deep and peel the onion. So you have to ensure that it's a balance for sure.
Yeah.
And maybe oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Leslie, please.
No, I was just going to follow up on Martine's point, which is we've talked about the relationship between the CEO and the chair, but it calls into, what is the relationship board members or the chair have with other members of the executive? And because, you can have a CEO who guards that relationship and which for whatever purpose, but whether the chair or other members of committee chairs have sort of also a relationship with other members of management, that helps kind of give you more insight onto what's happening.
Tremendous. Thanks, Leslie. So let's, we could go on. I suspect we've just scratched the surface, but we're coming close to time. Thank you, Leslie, Brenda, and Martine, for sharing your expert insights in what I found to be a very stimulating and thought-provoking discussion. Thank you very much for that. And I'd like to, at this point, invite closing remarks from IWF Toronto Chapter Engagement Vice Chair, Judy Cohen. Judy, welcome.
Thank you, Nick. There are many, many takeaways from our discussion today. There are so many factors influencing an optimal versus a suboptimal board experience, including needing a culture of respect, trust, and candor, as mentioned by Martine. And as Brenda shared, being self-aware of your impact on other board members and the need to always be learning is key as we go into board positions. And lastly, Leslie's take on board service comes through as being a value exchange. And that seems something that is very present in all of her thoughts that she shared today. Nick, you encouraged everybody to be proactive about board orientation and onboarding, and also looking for voices not in the room and seeking third-party opinions and ideas. So that's a lot of rich information to take away today. I want to thank all of our members for joining us today. I'd like to thank Leslie, Brenda, and Martine, and also our team at Boyden for putting this together. Joanna and Nick, thank you so much. I hope everyone will be able to join us for our last section, aptly called That's a Wrap, on October 27th at 4 p.m. Good night, everybody, and thank you.